In this set of videos, I'm going to discuss the philosophy of John Locke. Now, if you'd like a short and mostly accurate summary of the views of John Locke, one place to look is in the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson's self-evident truths provide a fairly reliable expression of Locke's basic ideas. Given this relationship, and given the importance that the philosophy of John Locke had to the authors of the U.S. Constitution, there are important reasons to know and understand his philosophy. So I intend to present the philosophy of John Locke through the lens of the Declaration of Independence. Towards that end, we'll start at the beginning. In Congress, July 4, 1776, the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. Just as an aside, it's interesting to note that the term united was in lowercase. It was not the name of a country. Instead, these were the 13 states, 13 separate countries, which, on this one issue, happened to be united. Next, in the Declaration of Independence, we get the following, quote, "When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them to another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation." End quote. It pretty much says, hey world, we kind of owe you an explanation for what we're going to be doing here. It's not something that people can do on a whim. It requires justification. The argument being presented will be made in support of a conclusion that appears later in the Declaration. The conclusion that, quote, "that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do." End quote. So what was their argument for this conclusion? To have an argument, we need a set of premises that are somehow supposed to support or show the truth of that conclusion. The Declaration tells us that some of these premises will be self-evident. It says right off, quote, "we hold these truths to be self-evident," end quote. Okay, so what does this mean? For Locke, morality was not an object of empirical study like the sciences. You can't make observations about morality and come up with a set of regularities. Morality is like mathematics or logic. It's built on a set of basic propositions or moral axioms, foundational claims that are not subject to proof. Think of geometry. In geometry, you were given a set of axioms that were used to prove theorems and the like, but these axioms themselves were never proved. Like the proposition that if two things are equal to the same thing, then they're equal to one another. Prove this. Note that giving me an example is not a proof. Showing me a black cat does not prove that all cats are black. The best you can do is challenge others to come up with a counterexample. I can prove the claim about black cats being false by pointing to a cat that is not black. But how can you prove such a claim being true? Or consider the basic principles of logic. In a video on basic logic, I asserted that arguments having the following form are always valid. P implies Q, P is true, therefore Q is true. I didn't prove this, I asserted it, and then effectively challenged folks to find a counterexample, to find a case in which the premises were true and the conclusion is false. You can't find one. The proof that this is a valid argument form is self-evident. So, according to Locke, morality, like math and logic, has these self-evident axioms. At which point, the skeptic might scoff and say, "Oh yeah, name one." And Locke says, well, as it's expressed in the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal. Or, in the words of John Locke, quote, "creatures of the same species and rank, promiscuously born to all the same advantages of nature and the use of the same faculties, should also be equal one amongst another without subordination or subjection." Or we could express it as follows. No person has a natural right to rule. No person has a natural duty to obey. Now, if you doubt this, then name somebody who has a natural right to rule or a natural duty to obey. By the way, Locke's political philosophy is written into the second treatise on civil government. The first treatise, the one that very few people read anymore, argued this thesis that nobody has a natural right to rule. Kings in Europe at the time liked to argue that they ruled by divine right, that God made them king, or that they can trace their ancestry back to being the legal heir of Adam. Locke argued that this was nonsense. First, if kings were selected by God, then clearly God could do a better job of selecting kings than evidence provides. And by the way, the year before publication, 1689, Parliament in England effectively fired the King of England, King James II, and hired their replacement, William and Mary of Orange. So it was hard to dispute the claim that it was Parliament that chose the king, not God. Anyway, we can't prove that nobody has a natural right to rule and nobody has a natural duty to obey. All you can do is make the case more vivid. Locke does describe a case so as to make the principle more vivid. This is to describe man in a state of nature. So imagine some continent with a sprinkling of people on it, each with their own distinct lives. Try as you might, you can't take this situation and identify a person who has a natural right to rule over any other, and no person in this world has a natural duty to obey any other. They just don't exist. Here, imagine that we decide to take a field trip to Alice Springs, Australia. We're in this huge jet with 500 other passengers flying over the Pacific Ocean. We get caught by a rip in the time-space continuum and teleported back in time 65 million years, where we crash land on the coast of some continent. Nobody's around but us. Somebody stands up and says, I am the closest living descendant of King James II of England, and by right I am the ruler of this community, and you are all my subjects. How long do you think it would take for somebody to tell James's closest living descendant to sit down and shut up? The claim that a natural right to rule or duty to obey exists would be dismissed as nonsense, because it is nonsense. What about children? Do adults have a natural right to rule children, and do children have a natural duty to obey parents? Well, actually, adults don't have a natural right to rule over children, nor do children have a natural duty to obey their parents. Parents have an obligation to take care of their children and may rule over children only in accordance with this obligation to promote the child's welfare. Children have a prudential duty to obey parents protecting their welfare, but have no duty to obey parents who are abusive, for example. This is not a case of a natural right to rule and duty to obey. It's a case of a natural duty to care for and a potential duty to accept instruction. So, in this argument for a political separation from England, the Declaration of Independence began with a self-evident principle that nobody has a natural right to rule and nobody has a natural duty to obey, which means that the king in Great Britain has no natural right to rule the colonies, nor do the colonists have a natural duty to obey the King of England. This leads to the next proposition. Quote, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. End quote. You are the absolute sovereign of a nation with a population of one person. It is up to you to regulate the behavior of the citizens of your own personal nation. Nobody has a right to invade your kingdom. Now, your kingdom, Locke would argue, extends to your property. Locke has a substantial theory of property, which we still use today. That which you attach your labor to, your life to, so long as somebody else hasn't already claimed it, is as much yours as the life you invested in it. This is a complex subject that deserves a video of its own. And by the way, Locke generally used the phrase life, liberty, and property. However, Locke also wrote that the necessity of pursuing happiness is the foundation of liberty. Property is a means to an end. Life, liberty, and happiness are the actual ends. Furthermore, note that these rights are inalienable. They cannot be given away, nor can they be taken. Of course, one person can kill another, one person can enslave another, but that is not taking away a right. That is violating a right, and that's a different thing. The victim's rights to life and liberty are preserved, meaning that the moral permission to respond to the act as a violation, either by oneself or by others, remains. This is the start of a discussion relating Locke's theory to the Declaration of Independence. We've established the self-evident principle that no person has a right to rule another and no person has a duty to obey, from which it follows that each person is the absolute sovereign of their own life, giving them a right to liberty and, though we have not argued for it here, the property that is rightfully acquired. The next question is, how do governments get their legitimate powers? And that question will be addressed in the next video.